Hi, you know, here I am. I'm Cindy Finch. And Mike, I think cancer is a stupid jerk because it's taken a lot of my friends.
Uncorking a Story presents Cancer is a Stupid Jerk, a podcast where we share real stories from fighters, survivors, caregivers, and healthcare heroes who stand face to face with cancer and say, not today. We're all about embracing the laughs amongst the tears, finding elements of joy and lessons along the way, and proving time and again that love, laughter, and community are important tools on the treatment journey. So, whether you're in the thick of the fight, cheering someone on, or just here to be inspired by incredible tales of courage, resilience, recovery, and the undeniable power of the human spirit, you're in the right place, because together we're showing cancer that it picked the wrong fight. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin. Well, hello and welcome to the very first episode of Cancer is a Stupid Jerk. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and I'm really touched to have you with me as I embark on this new journey. Now, you might be asking yourself, how the heck did he come up with that title? Well, I do address that very early in this episode with Cindy Finch, but as a tease, as a little bit of a reveal, I'll let you know that it has to do with my brother Greg, whose battle with cancer ended last June. Now, I felt called to create this show after having a conversation with another family member who was also fighting cancer. He had read something that I had written about my brother and wanted to share just how much he liked the piece. Humble brag there for me. He also went on to tell me just how much the conversations he had with my brother over the years lifted his spirits on his bad days. Now, the two of them talked quite frequently, and they really served to lift each other up. So it got me thinking, why not create a show where those fighting cancer, as well as the people who are caring for them, could feel seen? Every week, I will bring you stories from people who are in the thick of the fight, those who are in remission, and those who, like my brother, are done fighting. Now, I do want to shine a light on caregivers on the show because they often go less seen than those they care for. It's very easy for caregivers to feel invincible because, let's face it, they must keep it all together while juggling all of life's other responsibilities and then manage not to break down in front of the people that they're caring for. So, for these reasons and for so many more, caregivers are worthy of recognition, and we will have a bunch of them on the show. So I hope you will join me every week. And if you like what you hear, please share it with a friend who could use some inspiration. You could find us on all social media platforms at Stupid Jerk Cancer. And lastly, I want to invite you to subscribe to Cancer is a Stupid Jerk wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube at Stupid Jerk Cancer. Now it's time for me to introduce you to today's guest, the very first on Cancer is a Stupid Jerk, Cindy Finch. Cindy is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in helping people through their darkest times. She trained at the Mayo Clinic and has been featured in the Los Angeles Times, HuffPost, and Cure magazine. A cancer survivor herself, Cindy writes and works from lived experiences. She's helped thousands of people through their suffering, encouraging them to move forward and to keep enduring to come out invincible. Welcome to Cancer is a Stupid Jerk, Cindy Finch.
Cancer is a stupid jerk.
Stupid jerk. I'm going to give you the backstory to the title of this podcast, Cindy. I think that's a good place for us to begin. So, my brother Gregory was diagnosed with lung cancer in August of 2020. So, we've got COVID to deal with, and now he gets this. To call it a curveball is to put it way too lightly.
Yeah.
Non-smoker. Not that that would make a difference, right? I mean, you get it, and let's not blame anybody
It
for
makes
how
a
they get.
difference. It makes a difference in how you look at it.
Yeah,
I don't know why it does. It's just what we do.
yeah, and it's like I feel the need to sort of justify it somehow, but really, no real need to do that. So he had a good year and a half on his first therapy, this immunotherapy. Basically, his cancer was like in the fluid around his lungs. And
Mhm.
when he was at his worst pre-diagnosis, he was getting about 2 liters of fluid drained from his lungs every other day. And
Mhm.
they diagnosed him, shock of a lifetime, put him on this therapy. It turns it off. So he went from having 2 liters drained to about two like teaspoons drained. So this stuff was working, and for a year and a half it was working until it stopped working, and then pain comes in and coughing and all this stuff. And whenever he would cough, he would pound his chest and he would say, "Stupid jerk, stupid jerk."
Yes.
And I was reflecting on this. He's gone almost a year now. I can't believe that phrase just came out of my mouth. And I'm reflecting on this and I'm like, he's right. Cancer is a stupid jerk. And I bet,
Yeah.
and I bet
Mhm.
he's not the only one that feels that way. I bet I'm not the only one that feels that way. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna run with this somehow. And here we are talking together about cancer being a stupid jerk.
Okay, so let me just ask you, because you know what I do for a living. For your listeners, I'm a therapist. What was that like for your family?
Oh
That
my
must have
God.
been horrendous.
It was horrendous because I mean, such a major curveball. Talk about news that you did not expect to hear. Greg had struggles with Lyme's disease, long-term Lyme disease. So,
Miserable.
he hadn't been feeling well for years. I mean, he had a really rough go of it in his 30s and into his 40s. And, with this, we're like, okay, complications from Lyme. This is probably some kind of
Sure.
complication from Lyme. Those little critters that bury into your system, and they hide in your cells. We figured it was that, and then turns out it's not. What compounded it was the fact that it was COVID. So we were
Yeah.
not seeing anybody. So we were
Wow.
all distanced, and we were rule followers, right? We are socially distancing. We are not, and now he's super concerned because, of course, COVID is a lung thing, right? And
Mm.
it hits the respiratory system, and he's got
All like
he,
this, like terrible
he
storm.
he is now super high risk. So what compounds it is the fact that we can't be there. Like we're a tight family. We can't be with him. We can't be in the same room. Zooms don't cut it.
No.
So it was hard. And then, you go through that period of time where you forget because he's feeling good and because things are
Mm-hmm.
working and things are doing what they're supposed to be doing. But, every month or every couple of months, he would go and have a scan and just be like so nervous. And the anxiety that would provide was, I mean, I don't know how to describe it, only that
Scanxiety. That's what I call it.
scanxiety. That's a great term.
Anxiety.
That's a
Yeah.
great term. And but they would go. He would go into Memorial Sloan in New York City, or in Westchester County, depending on who we had to see that day. And if they were in New York City and everything was clear, they'd go to the Oyster Bar in Grand Central and have a Manhattan or a cocktail, no matter what time of day it was. And if
That's
they were in
right.
Westchester, they'd go to this place called Walter's Hot Dogs on Palmer Avenue, which we all grew up going to have a little celebratory hot dog. Now, you might say hot dogs are disgusting, but let me tell you, these are the filet mignon of hot dogs. The filet
That's
mignon.
right. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's just native nourishment.
Yeah, I mean it's total comfort, 100% comfort food.
100%.
So it was hard, and being separated was hard. And then as things opened up a little bit more, we were able to get together, hang out outside. One of the highlights that I have was 4th of July in the town he lives in, which is one town over from me. 4th of July has a race. It's called 4 on the 4th. So,
Yeah.
if you're really clever, you could figure out that it's a 4-mile race on the 4th of
Yeah.
July. Well, I'm a runner. Greg was never really a runner. My sister-in-law Carolyn is very athletic, so he said, "You know what, Michael, I'm going to do that race with you because what better way of giving cancer the finger than doing a 4-mile race, right?"
Love it.
So we do the race. I watch them finish, and they are holding hands crossing the finish line, and they're both wearing these T-shirts that say "Believe in miracles," right? So that is now we're getting to like the high point, right? The high
Mhm.
point. And
Mhm.
then, a few months later, January comes around, things start to not work, and things change fast. Things when they change fast. And
That's right.
we had a high point last summer where my twin brother got married. Um, had a great time at the wedding. I had my brother's girls with us celebrating. My brother and his wife were in the hospital. They were watching Zoom from, I think he was at Sloan Kettering at the time. and then a few weeks after that was the last time we got to hang out with him. So
Ugh.
it was a roller coaster. That was it's a roller coaster. It's a roller coaster of emotion, and the floodgates that opened afterwards. It's like
Shit
hard
show.
to describe. It's a shit show, but you know a thing or two about shit shows because I know we focused on talking about me, but you're no stranger to this as well. You're not also what was it? Do you remember the Hair Club for Men, Cy Sperling, where he goes, I'm not only the president, I'm also a client. You know a
Yeah,
thing
I'm
or
also
two.
and yeah, I'm also a client, and it was like the endorsement. Yeah, you're exactly right in saying what a roller coaster it is, and what a um, dark night of the soul is what I would call that a lot of times. I'm not the first one to call it that. I'm just one recently to say, hey, do you guys remember how the dark night of the soul is so miserable for most people because it's there changing you, and it's misery, and there's not enough light, and you don't know where it's headed, and the whole thing feels shitty. I got cancer the first time when I was 31 and I was pregnant, and it was out of the blue, and it was kind of interesting, like how you said that he had Lyme's. So I had pneumonia, and the doctor, because I was in an HMO at the time. I was younger. I didn't have like really high end health insurance, and this HMO doctor just kept giving me Tylenol and amoxicillin, but he didn't take a chest X-ray. And I didn't even know at 31, like, you're so dumb about that stuff. So, and the pregnancy, and I had little kids and stuff. So finally, when they pulled a chest X-ray, I had this 8-inch cancer in my chest. And he called the paramedics to his office and said, "You need to come have your husband get the kids. You're a young mom. I just schlepped all the kids in there with me." And that was like the odyssey began, and it was everything you don't want it to be. It went from bad to worse, and it went downhill from there. And then they used this crazy cocktail to treat my cancer because I was young, and then the baby was born, so then they could come at it, because you can't really do back then, 20 years ago, you can't do aggressive cancer treatments while you're pregnant. It's changed a little bit now, but so the baby was born, our son Brandon, our baby. Um, and the cancer treatments themselves caused me to go in heart, liver, and lung failure. And that I was like, wait, what? Wait, I was like, what? And it
At
was
what point do you question whether or not there is a God? Like when that happens?
many times. We had it out. I canceled God. I canceled him many times. I'm like, you're fired. You're done. This is ridiculous. This is what the number. I learned to swear during my prayer time with God during that time. It was like, look, if I'm going to die, I'm getting it all off my chest. So there was, so yeah, that's like, I don't get it. I don't get it. And here's the other thing. And I bet your brother felt the same. There's this thing, because I was getting my lungs tapped with this needle around the pleura, all the fluid that's in there, 2 liters at a time, which by the way is miserable. Poor Greg. But there's this thing of like, okay, here's me, Mike. I'm okay dying. I mean, I'm not like a fan, but okay, I'm gonna die. Or I really want to live, but I don't want to be in between. No, I'm not a fan of suffering. And by suffering, I'm a white woman in the United States with American healthcare. So that suffering is relative to your experience. But
Well, to be
there's a
fair, you had an HMO. I mean,
the HMO. Oh, my very first chemo, I was in a county hospital with a homeless person as my roommate who brought their friend in. And it would take the nurses an hour to come when you push the call light. And I remember just staying awake. Nothing wrong with homeless people, but I, it was just my first like maiden voyage in inpatient care, and it scared the shit out of me, especially because the HMO doctor released me from the hospital, and then I went home, and he called in the middle of the night and said, "Oh, I forgot to read your CAT scan before you leave. Could you come back?" And we didn't get that message, so then I was in um, full lung failure,
so
and
you
and it
had
was
yeah. What type of cancer did you have? I think I may have missed that.
yeah, I had non-Hodgkins lymphoma.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just this like cancer. People get it. It's not uncommon. But the problem was that it was sort of this wicked intersection of pregnancy hormones that give all this growth to the baby and then not being able to treat it. So it had just inside of me. So yeah, we don't even have to get off on HMO care. What's so hard is suffering for families. And you guys were in this predicament of like, we can't get to him. It's very hard to be there. We're all going through this. And it's just such a shock and a trauma upon a trauma while we're in the middle of a worldwide trauma. Let's
Yeah.
remember that. You
Yeah, and
guys
then,
were.
I know I get the sense that we're gonna bounce between you and me in this one, but that's nothing new for us. If people have heard our first interview on Uncorking a Story, they might know what they're in for, but,
Didn't I interview you on your podcast?
I
Wasn't
think
that how we
you were the first one who interviewed me on my own podcast, and, I appreciate that, but, I'm compounding it too, so now my parents let me just throw a wrinkle in the mix here. Um, my parents they live in South Florida. So we're all in Connecticut. They're in South Florida. My mother has memory issues, which is a
right?
polite way of saying she's got age-related dementia. So she's got
Mhm.
no short-term memory whatsoever. Now, look, if she were joining us on this episode, Cindy, she would say, "Oh, Cindy, this is my son. He's one half of my large baby girl." Because she always says the same story to people. Oh, Michael and his brother, they were supposed to be a large baby girl. I don't know what happened, but I wound up giving birth to twin boys. And boy, Donnie, weren't you shocked? I mean, but my brother said, you know what? So my father knew that my brother was sick. He wouldn't let any of us tell my mother. So she was in the dark until the day he died. Um,
No.
until the day he died. So I remember we flew them up.
Take that in. I need to take that in because that's
Taking
a
in. Oof.
hard decision to make. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was a hard one. So the last 3 days of his life, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm with him, with family surrounding him. We're all kind of taking turns coming in and out of his room, and I'm trying to tell my dad. So Tuesday was the day the doctor came to me, and I'll never forget it. He was in the hospital technically for pneumonia. That might
Right.
sound familiar, but that's what they kept
Mhm.
saying. They're like, you know what? We've got to treat this pneumonia. The pneumonia will kill him before the cancer does. And that was the line that they kept telling us. So we're like, okay, we're hope against hope. He's battling pneumonia going on like a month at this point.
Yeah,
And
we're just gonna do what the doctors tell us, right? Yeah.
so on Tuesday afternoon, early evening, um, Carolyn, my sister-in-law, calls me. I'm giving them like a private moment. So it's at this point it's just the two of us hanging out. Um, so I get a text from her or a call, and she's like, "Hey, come upstairs. The doctor's gonna call me, and I want like another pair of ears to hear this." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Absolutely." On the way up, talk to the doctor, and they're like, "You know what? It's really not the pneumonia. We really don't think it's the pneumonia anymore." And at this point, and these are the dreaded words you get, right? At this
Yeah.
point, all we can do is make him comfortable. And that's like the mic drop moment. And I'm like, oh shit. Like that's the news. Like we look at each other. Now the looks we give each other suggest that we are now trauma bonded for life, like just hearing that news. And
Ah!
they got two young kids at home. He's my older brother. He waited a while to start his family, so his kids are younger than mine. But they're 15 and 12 at the time.
They're
Um,
kids.
they're kids.
That's the important thing. They're kids.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
asked for this. Nobody asked for this. That's
No,
right.
no. Oh, no. This is I mean, you talk about unfair and, it's,
Mhm.
but it was reality. So I call my da so now I've gotta make these 3 phone calls that I just do not want to make, right? First call is to my wife, and I'm letting her know exactly what's happening. And I'm like, as businesslike as I can be,
Of course.
because I just can't get through it without, like, stepping outside of myself and doing this as if I'm holding a fucking business meeting. So,
Right, right.
I tell her the news, then I call my twin brother, and we conferenced in our sister, and I break them the news, and I don't even know who started crying first, but the wailing I heard was, I mean, it still haunts me to this day, and,
Can't
you know, 'cause
unhear.
you can't unhear it, and I think it
I
really
hear.
was my sister who was just beside herself because she couldn't
Yeah.
go to the hospital that day. She had, commitments or something, and we,
And it's COVID. Nobody was letting us in hospitals. I
well,
remember.
this
Like,
was last summer, so the 2023, it was kind of a little
it's
bit
a
better.
little.
Um,
Yeah.
it was a little bit better, and then I made the call that I really needed to, get strong for, which was calling my dad to let him know that, his firstborn was going to pass
Yeah.
away, and he started to cry. He started to
Yes.
wail, and he's like, I can't. Why aren't I there? I should be there." And I'm like, "Well, I think you should really look into coming up, like, now." And,
Like
like, I had my hands
now.
full, like, now. Um,
Yeah.
and he, for whatever reason, he didn't make any plans that night. The next morning, I go back to Sloan, and I had packed a suitcase with me. So, we live in Connecticut. I take the Metro North down to Manhattan, get off at 125th. I got a suitcase with me, and my sister's like, "Why do you have a suitcase?" I'm like, "Because somebody's going to have to fly down to Florida and pick up mom and dad because I don't think that they're going to be able to make this trip on their own." Um, so I was ready to do that, but at the same time, I wasn't going to leave the hospital until whatever happens, right? So I
Yeah.
call my dad that morning, and he's like, I really need to come up today." I'm like, "Well, I agree." And yeah, he's 90, 91. He's not the most tech savvy, right? So
Not
now now it's
at
like
that point.
now it's like scrambling to get him up here. Like, get how do we get him and mom up here with like 4 hours notice? There's all the airlines are booked.
Oh, of
Everyone's
course.
booked. So I'm just constantly hitting refresh, hoping something opens up, and we finally got them a flight to Newark. By the time they got to to Newark Airport, he had lost his fight, and
Oh my
I'll
god.
never forget their cab. Or no, my twin brother went to go pick him up. Him dropping my parents off right in the front of Memorial Sloan Kettering, and my mother just being like, "What are we doing here? Why are we here? Why are we here?" And that's when she finds out. And,
Oh,
oh, man, that was rough. That was a rough one.
was
That
she
was
able to keep that knowledge with her, or did it need to be repeated every morning?
It needed to be repeated a little bit, but the moment because we kept him in his room. The
Mhm.
doctor said, "Oh, you could stay here for a few hours, it'll be fine." So, that was a rough one.
What do
Um,
you even say to a mother seeing her son? That's
you
a
don't
mama
say
bear.
you don't say anything. You don't say
No,
anything because let me tell you what, that maternal instinct took over,
that's
and
right.
she saw him. I won't repeat what she said, but she knew everything she needed to know in that moment. Um, and the next few days were a constant, "Well, why did this happen? What happened? Tell me the story," and all that stuff. But in that moment, she knew everything she needed to know. So
Yes.
that made it harder. That made it
Yes.
harder, and,
Yeah.
then it's
The
like the things reset. It's like, okay, now like, I remember standing in his hotel, I almost said his hotel room, standing in his hospital bedroom, and it's me, my mother, my brother, and my sister, and my father, and that was the last time the 6 of us were together. It was the last time that
yeah,
we'd ever be together again, and I
I
mean,
know.
stupid jerk, right? I mean, stupid jerk.
A fucking stupid jerk.
It's a
And
it's
who wants a family reunion like that?
No.
Who wants to have the family dinner gathering under such a dark
Yeah,
cloud? That's
yeah.
not what anybody would have chosen.
No.
Yeah.
But, all right, we need to take a break from my side of the fence. I need to go back to you. So you've got young kids, newborn. you're kind of going through it. Your organs are
Mhm.
deciding to fail. And it's not lost on me that you said this is when you had cancer for the first time. Was there a part 2 to this?
Yes and no. How do I mean that though? Yes and no. I've had a couple. No, the truth is no. I haven't had it, but I've had scares. I've had scares because when I left, okay, so here's the progression. Let's make it quick because, a lot of people, it's really, I wanted to come, I'll tell you why I wanted to come do this with you. First of all, because you're solid gold. You just are. I'll never forget and I've used your line. You told me remember when you got laid off and your boss was like, I'm sorry, it's just a lever I had to pull.
Oh my god,
Remember
yes.
that?
I'll never forget that one.
Yeah, who could? I've used that. I've said, "Oh, there's this friend of mine, and let me tell you how he got laid off or how he got fired." And people look at me and they're like, "Are you shitting me?" And I'm like, "No." Like this is the absolute, dunce, numbness, dissociation, indifference of corporate America. Like, bye, gotta go. Numbers don't match. Bye bye. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this, just because you do such good work. But the second reason I wanted to do it is really for your listeners, because my story, your story, they're stories and they are profound and they had a significant effect on both of us and have changed the trajectory of our lives, right? And the work we both do now is in service to helping other people as the trajectory of their life is yanked and rerouted someplace totally different. And that's where I work now. I tell people, look, life has this very, I'm not the first person to say it, but I'm going to say it now. Life has a very game-like quality to it. So there's these levels that we seem to find ourselves on, whether it be the level of having triplets and unexpectedly, or twins, where your mom was like, that's supposed to be a really big baby girl, and here we have two sons, which is beautiful, I'm sure. um but there's darker corridors in life, and so now I work on the dark levels. That's why I said I work on the dark levels, and people come to me in those dark passages, and for whatever reason, I wouldn't choose my story again, but I wouldn't change it.
Mm.
I
So
wouldn't change it.
that's one thing I wanna dig into a little bit, which is this notion of, I spend a lot of time thinking, okay, well, why do bad things happen to good people, right? Age old question. How can there be a God if he lets, stuff like this happen?
Step is
And
that.
it is fucked up. I mean, it is fucked up, right? But it is. And there are like a group of people who do feel like we're all part of a simulation. I don't really want to go down that path right now. That's the story. That may be a story for
You don't want
another
to. You
time.
don't. You don't want to go down conspiracies and stuff right
Well,
now. No.
there are a group of people who feel like the Matrix movie was a documentary. And I'm not passing judgment on that. People think that, Roman Catholicism is funny, and that's what I choose to practice. However, one thing that has helped me just kind of reframe my thoughts on kind of not only what happened, in the events of last summer, my brother's passing, but in other aspects of my life is thinking about life as not something that happens to you, but something that happens for you. And when
Mhm.
I think about it like that, as hard as it is, it forces you to think about, okay, well, what are some of the lessons I learned having gone through this experience?
Mhm.
What could I take away? Like, what are the things I learned from my brother and watching him in his final days? And one
That's
thing
right.
that I come up with was just how full of gratitude he was until the very end. Every nurse, doctor, aide who came in, picked him, prodded him, poked him, he always said thank you to them because he knew that they were
Mhm.
there trying to help him. And
That's
just
right.
the love that I saw between him and his wife, and
Mhm.
just what I witnessed from him and his children. It's like I learned that there is so much more. There is so
That's
much
right.
more. And then when I wrote his, I was privileged to write his obituary, and I
Mhm.
did it. I say I wrote it. I put all the words on the paper, right? But I wrote it based on stories I was being told from a lot of different people. His friends, his wife, his daughters, his in-laws, my parents, my sister, everybody. So I was able to hear these stories. And the one thing that my sister-in-law told me was, your brother. Now, my brother, like growing up, right? He was the big brother who we all needed, right? We all needed a big brother like this who would like pin your shoulders down like with his like with his like knees
Right.
and then grab your
Yeah.
hand with it, right? And he would always
Oh.
do these. He'd be, why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself? This was my brother, right? Tough
You just, like,
guy.
start crying in your pants and stuff.
He literally one night, I'm in my early 20s, or maybe probably not my teens because I'm still living at home. And he comes into my room at like 2 or 3 in the morning with the girl he was dating at the time. And they give me a code red right out of A Few Good Men, right? She like holds her hand over my mouth and he just starts beating me like for no reason whatsoever. This is my brother. Um, Cut to many, many, many years later, I'm hearing how one of his favorite things to do was just sit in his backyard and wait for hummingbirds to come.
Mm.
And just that, and then so what that taught me was he found so much beauty and joy in just very, very simple things. And here I am, in my life, caught up with, the
Right.
pressures of career, the pressures of family,
Yeah.
like obsessing over the things I don't have, right? And that was a
Working.
It's a big
Yeah,
part of my life is that, I don't have this. If I only had this, my life would be better. This would make me happy. And
that's right.
the secret is being happy with what you have and maybe just waiting in your backyard for a hummingbird to show up.
Yeah.
And nothing made him happy. He got so excited over stuff like that.
And that's why grief is good. That's why grief is good. Because there's something that happens when I go into this dark passageway of suffering or life threatening illnesses or a significant loss like you guys have gone through. It's like all of time in life stops and you enter into this reevaluation of what's really important. I've heard it said that cancer lowers all your expectations on life. It does, because all of a sudden, when it's life or death, okay, I'm trying to stay alive over here. So, what's really important? What's really important? So, what's really important is every moment that I have right in front of me. What's really important? I swear to God, Mike, the amount of minutia and bullshit that is cut away in somebody's life when they face their own mortality or that of somebody they dearly love is it's life altering. And you can't unsee it. You can't unring that bell once you see it, because all of a sudden you've gone through this doorway and you realize, oh, none of this other stuff matters. Like, one of the big lessons I learned is health is wealth. Health is wealth. And I protect my health like nobody's business, because when I left my ordeal, so I had cancer, they threw the big guns at it. 5 years later, I had heart, liver, and lung failure all at once. So I was in all the local hospitals, and they're like, gee, we don't know what to do. We've seen one, but not all three together, blah, blah, blah. Who knows? So I wind up at via UCLA, which I don't know, you can cut this later, but was the worst healthcare I ever had. The worst. I was abused and neglected at UCLA, and that's sad. But anyway, I ended up at Mayo Clinic, and the doctors there said, "Well, we need to give you open heart surgery." And I was like, "Yeah, because that's what every 35-year-old is looking to have, you know." And he's like, "And it's a certain kind of open heart surgery where we take the whole lining off of your heart. Like, I guess apparently there's this." Lining that holds your heart in place. And they're like, we have to take it off. It's burned. So then I had that, and they're like, ooh, like that didn't totally work. So we're going to need to do open lung surgery. And so this like space of big, what I call big, heavy hitting surgeries, which were back to back, really, really, really lowered my control. It was a very powerless situation. And I think everybody should be powerless a few times in their lives. I really do, because when I'm powerless, man, I will start to get as real as the day is long about what matters, who I am, who I love, what's important, and what I plan to do with my one and only life, even if it's only an hour I have left to live. I remember I had a friend, you know, I was kind of boohooing on the phone to her. We had met and kind of had this spontaneous meeting. Her name's Sharon. I was in line at Target. I was bald. I had a pick line in, and I had my little two older kids by the hands. They were like 4 and 6. And she walked up to me and she said, are you in cancer treatments?" And I was like, "Yeah." I mean, because I looked kind of crazy, right? And she goes, "Me too." And she goes, "What kind of cancer do you have?" And I said, "Lymphoma." And she said, "Me too." So we struck up this friendship, and we went through our treatments back and forth. She actually just passed away last weekend. So this has been a parallel process for she and I, through this. Fought like a champion. So I called her like all boo-hooing when I was like, I thought I had gotten through cancer, but now I have all these, problems afterwards. And I tell people cancer has a long, wicked tail. When you think it's over, it's like there's some other, you got to pay the piper in some other way. I've seen it so many times with my breast cancer survivor friends and whatnot. Anyhow, so I was crying on the phone, and she told me something, and not everybody can say this. She said, "Look, I need you to get off the pity pot, and I need you to put on your big girl panties, and I need you to go do every last thing that you need to do for Darren and the kids. You cannot sit home and feel sorry for yourself anymore. You need to go." And I actually have written about that story in my workbook that's coming out. And I have the actual assignment. People, what is your pity pot? Why? What do big girl panties look like that you need to put on? What will that look like step by step? Why? What's your overall goal? Because there's certain people like the Mike Carlins of the world, or Lori Jean Glass of the world, that can go, "Here's what you need." And there's not many people that I would have accepted that from,
Yeah.
because I felt like nobody understood me. Darren and I have still never met anybody with 3 little kids, cancer during pregnancy, heart, liver, lung, all this stuff. And then all the crazy warnings doctors gave me. They're like, secondary cancer, very high likelihood. You might need a heart transplant. Leukemia is big. Breast cancer from radiation, like da 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 da. And sure enough, we've circled back in that. But back to Sharon, she was somebody that I pray everybody has when they're in a foxhole, that somebody who goes, "You know what, I've been here. Let me just, let's hashtag real talk.
So
You need to go through this."
I need to get a little woo here, which is w- was it was it a chance encounter meeting Sharon in Target, or was that some kind of divine
It
intervention?
was absolutely divine. I have about 7 divine intervention stories, and some of them I just keep to myself, but others I'm like, there's no way. And I had one where I was the Sharon.
Mm.
So I was at UCLA, my favorite healthcare place, and I was had a roommate who was a physician, and she was there on pain management for a cardiac problem she had. And in the middle of the night, when we were sharing a room together, she tried to kill herself. And I was like, I am not equipped right now, being on all these monitors and life saving transfusions and treatments, to really deal with a suicidal person. I do that in real life, but not when I'm bedbound. But that chance roommate situation was life altering for both of us. And had I not been there, I'm sure God, the universe, whatever that is, would have put somebody there. But I was there as a praying Christian, and I said, "Look, at whatever happens," her name was Eileen, "whatever happens, Eileen, I'm with you, I'm for you. Whatever this is, I don't know why we're in this crazy place together, but we are." And the next day, the nurses got her, and I'd never seen anybody in 4-point restraints. I had never seen anybody like that up close. And I think that sometimes we're just used in those ways to have an encouragement, to have somebody as a strong somebody else that's like, "You know what, I see you. You're not alone in this."
Yeah, my brother Um, my brother would converse quite a bit with this guy named Mike. Great name, by the way. This guy
What?
Mike. So Mike is married. So we're gonna play a little family tree here. Mike is married to my sister's husband's sister. Okay, so
Okay.
it's
It's
my
family,
sister's
sure.
brother-in-law. But we weren't related through blood. Anyway, so Mike, so I get I write. I've been writing a lot about my brother recently, and sometimes I'll get really inspired. I'll put something out there. He read one of the last things I wrote, and he just sent me a note. He's like, "Hey, I just want you to know, um, really beautiful what you wrote about your brother." And he's like, "I've been reading your stuff, and I promise you, this is not a way to plug the open mic blog, but." But Mike
But if it
himself
is,
but if people wanna read it, that's fine. We all have free will. But, um, so Mike himself has cancer. And he's been fighting for years. And, there was one point where it just really was not looking good for Mike. And Mike and Greg would talk all the time. And he sent me in his note, he said to me, "I talked to your brother so much. We got each other through our darkest moments." And, I just, you know, it just to me it underscores like your story with Sharon, how important it is to have, that somebody in the foxhole with you. That's somebody you can call because no one else really can understand what you're going through, right? I mean, no
no
one.
one else has really earned the right. That I think it's so important unless you've walked that walk, unless you've been in what faith circles called the Via Dolorosa, which is the way of suffering. I don't want to hear from you. Quite honestly, because it's all theoretical. It's like when you have kids, when you don't have kids and you try to tell parents how to parent, it's like
Yeah.
sh- sh- shut it. You haven't been up night and day with three kids till you're at the end of the rope and you haven't bathed or right. So some certain people haven't earned the right, but that guy, Mike, and your brother Greg, he was exactly what was needed, and they could speak from a soul deep place. I call those friends anamkara. It's the soul friend.
Mm.
We all need a soul friend who gets it.
But that's one of my goals with this is, number one, to make people feel seen.
That's right.
And but also to bring people together, who might need that soul friend.
That's
So that's one of my goals with this. Of course, I want to uncork their stories, but I also want to sort of create this community of people and supporters. Whether it's caregiver to caregiver, because that's a big part of this. Caregivers need to feel seen too.
caregivers
Or
have a harder path,
yeah,
harder path than
yeah,
cancer patients. We can debate it, but they do because nobody's handing them Lortab or OxyContin or a nursing or medical team. And they're still going to work and watching the kids. And they are getting secondary trauma and vicarious trauma right along with that patient. And by the way, they may have to live through the death of this person and still go on.
yeah,
Caregivers,
yeah.
they're the bridge.
It's a tough one. So this is for them too. Um, and healthcare professionals, the people who are on sort of on the front lines fighting, along with them, providing the ammunition. Maybe they're not doing the fight, but they're providing the ammunition and the battle plan. So
Well, I think so because what happens with healthcare workers. So I spent a few years working at Mayo Clinic because I thought if I could return to the place that I had been helped so much, and Mayo Clinic was truly fabulous. There's some interesting side stories. Maybe we'll pick them up some point because there were some um, interesting dark places when patients experience um, things we won't talk about right now. But um, I wanted to go back and work in a place that had helped me so much. And, the healthcare workers, so I went to work at their hospitals. And here's the thing as healthcare workers need everybody on the worst day of their life. Right. And so that frontline worker, when you are the bumper zone, if you will, or this thin blue line, let's call it that, it's very, very difficult because every customer, client, patient that comes through is absolutely in crisis in some way or another, or is about to be. And that's a very tender space to show up. And what if you show up and you're the healthcare worker and you're a real jerk? I'll tell you, those families will fight with you. Or what if you show up and you're so tender and sensitive and empathetic that you can't function and do your job? It's such a tricky space. My hat's off to healthcare workers.
Yeah. You're checking all these boxes,
Mm.
because
It's
you
a
know,
interesting, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
interesting person. Well, this won't be the only time you're on this program. I know that. It's too interesting talking to you otherwise, but I do want I do have two follow up, final questions for you. The first is, I know you mentioned early on in our conversation you canceled God, and I'm curious when. I don't even know what pronoun to use for God because he sounds too limiting. But when when were they uncanceled? If they were uncanceled.
You know, I had to uncancel him as soon as I realized that he was all I had. I was like, "Shit, man, where
And
else am
that's
I
and
gonna
that's how
go?"
he gets you. And that's how he gets you.
I stayed up all night one night. I remember it very well. I was on Mary Bride 5 at Mayo Clinic. I was so mad. Like I have this thing. I'm like, I'm fine being dead, not really, but okay. Or I really want to be alive, but I don't want to be in between. So I said, I'm gonna stay up. It's time. I have hit my limit of suffering. I can't do this anymore. It's weeks, months, years. Like I years of my life have gone to terminal or traumatic illnesses. I remember my very first diagnosis when I finally got to an oncologist. He said, "You got about 6 days to live. What are we going to do here?" And I was like, "Are you?" So when I now fast forward, I'm at Mayo Clinic, still fighting this monster, and I'm like, I'm done. I need to tap out. It's too much. I'm 2,000 miles from home. I've had to shuttle my kids to friends and family. Who knows what was happening? We were a homeschool family for 2 years. Other stories. So my kids are really out of their element. And I said, I'm done. I need you to come for me. If you're real, if you really are who you say you are. So I stayed up all night fighting, crying, praying, all the things, all the Job things we do. And he didn't come. And I was like, you're a liar. You're a loser. This isn't right." I had somebody take me into a chapel and I ripped an entire Bible apart and threw it on the ground and cried and screamed and prayed. And then Mike, I go, well, I can't die just yet because I haven't really written out specific instructions for my kids. So I need to pause on my demand to die and go and get everything written out. And so I got a napkin on my bed tray. Obviously, if I can write, I'm not that close to death, right? So I was like, but wanted it to be accelerated so I could just be done. And I started writing this note to my kids about instructions, like for here's what's going to happen when I die. Here's who's going to take over. Here's like, I remember my daughter Jordan was like, who's going to cut the boy's hair? Her little brother's hair. And I was like, oh shit, got to write that down. Um, and what ended up happening is I wrote a poem to my children called On That Shore. And it was and still is my most prized possession. And it is a scene of heaven and how we'll be reunited as I received it on that napkin. And that's when God and I were back on because I was like, there's something that happened when I went toe to toe with you, but not really toe to toe. I'm sure God was just like, here, I'll give you pinky. That's because you're just so small by comparison. And I was so real and vulnerable and demanding and human. And out of that came this, to me, just the most gorgeous poem that I've ever read and I'm so proud of. And it needed to happen that way. So that's when we were back on. We started dating again then.
Back on. If
We
you
were back on.
if you could go back in time and whisper some words of advice into, let's go back to 30, 31, 32, kids, couple kids at home, one on the way, diagnosis that you never asked for. What words of advice would you give your younger self coming from Cindy Finch of today?
I would say, oh, dang, I love when you give me a good question like this. This is going to shape the rest of your life. And this is actually a setup for the rest of what's happening. Because, Mike, here's the deal: I became who I didn't have, I became who I needed. Who I am now is who I needed back then. So I would say let people help you. And we don't like to be on the receiving end of help, because being the helper is the power position, being the helped is the weaker. People who've never had to be cared for by friends, family, in-laws, healthcare workers, you're very weak and vulnerable. Let people help you, because you're going to block their blessing. Let it happen. The second thing is, I would say, is grab every moment with your kids or with the people that are the most important. Harvard says that there's two things that really matter after their whole grant study longitudinally. They looked for over 70 years and they distilled down to this group of people they followed what really mattered. It was thousands. And what really mattered were the relationships and meaningful work. You need to focus on your relationships. Nothing else matters at the end of the day. Of course, you need a house to live in, but really grab the relationships, make them the best. And that's what happened actually to me here lately. I had another cancer scare, went through it for 6 weeks, had a doctor tell me this is 75% um, likely breast cancer. So Darren and I, we've been through this. So we did what we call a cope ahead. I would have everybody who's facing anything dire right now do a cope ahead and check the facts. They can visit my website. I write about it. We did a cope ahead. If I'm going to die, because how many get out of jail free cards do I really get in life? I mean, I guess I'm a cat with 9 lives, so 3 down, 6 to go. So we did a cope ahead all the way to the end of my death. And then I went back and looked at all of the commitments, the requests, the appointments, any professional thing that I was looking at doing. And we looked at it through the lens: if I am going to get breast cancer and die, am I going to do this thing? And we had an entire list. And 75% of it, I said, no, 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 no. If I only have a few months to live, I'm not going to do any of these things, because they don't matter. In the last 2 months of your life, it doesn't matter whether I make a little more money or I write another book or I'm seen or my hair is cute. What really matters is the people that I have invested in and they've invested in me, that every last second that we can be together and I can deposit the love, the commitment, the attachment, and the beauty of having been privileged to know them.
Mhm.
That's what matters. So that's how I would organize my life. Organize your life as if you're going to die. That's
That's
what I would say.
that's a Tim McGraw song in there. Live like you were dying.
Oh, he's big. He's a big one for me. I got my I might die playlist in that stuff, that, and so do you. I've read it. You have songs that speak to you.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, you let it slip, Cindy, that you've got a workbook coming out, and you also talked, or I can see it behind your shoulder. Grief is Good, which I know is your book. Where can people learn more about you and perhaps pick up either Grief is book or this workbook that you teased us with earlier?
Yeah, cindyfinch.com. Workbook's coming out in June. The reason I did a workbook is I love the book. I mean, who wouldn't write a book that you love? I love it. But I realized when people, when you're in the ditch of grief, like grief brain, you can't really like get deep into chapters in a book. So I've taken the whole thing and I've translated it into little little modules and little thoughts and ways to work on yourself. For instance, in the workbook, I included the big girl panties, the pity pot, but I also included a section on forgiveness, reconciliation, restoration of relationships. Because when people are considering the end of their life, it's really hard to mend things with people where maybe they've been estranged or where you guys have broken relationship. So I have a very specific set of guidelines for what do you do if you want to get relationships back on track in the face of death. It's harder than you think because people are ornery. People are ornery. We'll talk about it sometime. Yeah, so I've included new tools. So cindyfinch.com. Thank you for asking.
Well, thank you, Cindy. Thank you for being our very first guest and telling all of our listeners why cancer is such a stupid jerk.
Fucking cancer.
Thank you for joining us today on Cancer is a Stupid Jerk. We hope you found inspiration in today's episode and felt the strength of a community that refuses to let cancer have the last word. Remember, you're not alone in this fight, and every step forward is a victory. Join us every Sunday for more stories of resilience and recovery, and make sure to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube or your preferred podcasting platform. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us at Stupid Jerk Cancer. If today's story moved you, consider sharing it with a friend or somebody who might need a dose of inspiration and encouragement. For all you bibliophiles out there, please check out our sister podcast, Uncorking a Story, which features interviews with best-selling authors. Until next time, keep laughing, keep loving, and keep fighting. This is Mike Carlin reminding you that together, we're unstoppable.